recording. And also, while we give folks oops, too many things open. We went so well last time. We're still kind of learning Poll Everywhere. So we'll be using this a little bit later throughout the call to get some input, even though we hope to have some open discussion as well. So just while we're giving participants another minute or two to join us, if you want to navigate to the Poll Everywhere, which is just the website at the top, pollev.com, SOTS 549. You can tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now. And I should introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Otts, the National Sea Grant Law Center, if you're new to the group and the call today.
Hey, Stephanie, this is Breck. Is this on research or extension or anything?
It's anything, whatever you're currently working on.
Thanks.
And while folks are doing that, I'll mention that I am recording this call today. We will post it to the National Sea Grant Law Center website after the call. We'll also convert these polling questions into a survey so that any of our colleagues that weren't able to join us today can follow along with the webinar and answer the questions. We'll keep it open for about a week or so. We did that after the last call, and it seemed to really help. Oh, great. There's so much different stuff. This is why I wanted to ask this question. It's just so cool to see all of the different things that our group, individuals in our group are working on. And after the last all hands call, Mary Donahue helped us put together a great kind of one pager, just highlighting the call, which we'll probably try to do after this call again to share back, some of this information. Right, so we'll give everyone just another minute in case anybody is typing and adding things in there, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the call. Great. Okay, well, thanks everyone. So just a refresher, so as I mentioned, I'm Stephanie from the National Sea Grant Law Center. Karen Bareford with the Extension Liaison with the National Water Center. We've just been providing kind of logistical support for the Sea Grant Water Resource Vision team, kind of just to help these conversations get going. But we also have our leadership group that is just providing guidance on the various things that we've been working on and moving things forward. So I just wanted to share who those folks are, so there isn't any really formality among the leadership group. It's just to keep the conversation going as well. So I should have put an actual webinar agenda slide. So a couple of things that we wanted to cover today. We wanted to share some information from some national updates and conversations that are happening. The bulk of the time will be spent about the webinar series, the 2021 webinar series. And then we have a couple of polling questions at the end to help us think about how we want these all hands calls to run in the future. And if you'll remember, on our first all hands call, we did some polling and the group coalesced around wanting to meet quarterly. So we are planning on a quarterly schedule for these all hands calls. And then there was some input about what we all as a group wanted to hear on those calls. So we'll get to that. But first, I wanted to provide a couple of national updates. So first, last week, at the end of last week, Susan White, the North Carolina Sea Grant Director and current Sea Grant Association President, reached out to me because she wanted to include a session on emerging contaminants at the upcoming spring SGA meeting. That session is scheduled for March 10th at 5 p.m. Since our group was already planning a webinar on emerging contaminants, I reached out to that group to do some brainstorming about what this session might look like. So right now, our proposed approach is lightning, like 4 or 5, we only have an hour, 4 or 5 lightning round presentations, and then some short breakout groups to talk about Sea Grant's niche. It's still in the preliminary stages. We have not reached out to anybody to give these presentations yet. If you're at all interested in joining the conversation about this session, feel free to reach out to me, shoot me an email. Happy to chat about what we've been talking about so far. This session at the SGA meeting is open to all members of the Sea Grant Network. Registration information did go out on Basecamp. So you may have seen it that way. If you didn't, please check in with your director for information about how to register for the SGA meeting if you would like to attend this session. Does anybody have any quick questions about that? You can come off of mute. We have a small group, or use the chat box. Good. Okay. Thanks. So I think this is a really great opportunity. I was really glad that Susan suggested it, and I think it's just a way to raise the visibility of what we're working on. The other thing that you may have heard about, but maybe not, depending on what listservs you're on, is the about to be announced competitions from the National Sea Grant Office. One is going to be focused on emerging contaminants and one on green infrastructure. But before I'll do that, so we did have a question about what topics would be covered in the lightning round. We haven't finalized that yet. We did talk about wanting to represent all regions in those lightning talks, as well as a diversity of the topic areas that we touch on. So we were thinking, you might have one that's focused on a human health aspect, one that focuses on fishery, aquaculture, one on recreation, tourism, but that are coming from all different regions. So that haven't been decided yet, but that was a proposed approach. So with respect to the competitions, we don't have details yet because these announcements obviously aren't out. There was a call yesterday with the John Pennick, Sea Grant Office Director, where they shared some of their thinking about this. Each competition is going to make one award of $850,000, which is kind of a 2-phase. First part would be to conduct scoping around the topic, and then the second part is to run a competitive research competition. The money will go to one program, but they're hoping to get consortiums of programs that have come together to apply. It's anticipated that these announcements will be released next week. So I wanted to raise it, one, to let everybody know in case you hadn't heard about it, but also to encourage you to think about the way that the Water Resources Vision team can be a mechanism to facilitate conversations if programs are looking to partner around these competitions, or how we move forward. The national office mentioned several times that they feel strongly that these competitions are tied and kind of are connected to the Water Resources Vision that we put together a couple of years ago. So I think these will be nice ones to see come to fruition and take advantage of through the network. So stay tuned for more information when those are released. So that brings us to the 2021 webinar series, which got off to a great start last month. So I'm just going to start with a quick overview for anyone who's new to the all hands call, and then we'll spend some time debriefing about the COVID-19 webinar, and then I'll share some updates about where we are in planning for the rest of the webinars for the year. So just a reminder that for this first year of the webinar series, the audience is internal. So this is ourselves, like the Sea Grant network. We are seeking to raise the visibility of water resources programming within the Sea Grant network. And so we did request that Sea Grant programs not share the announcement for the COVID-19 webinar widely on their kind of open listservs to the general public or to stakeholders, because we really wanted to provide the opportunity for the Sea Grant network to participate in these discussions around these innovative research, outreach, and other activities, that we're doing. And we're hoping that these webinars are also doing double duty, right? There's not just sharing information, but they're providing opportunities for participants to inform the Sea Grant water resources planning, whether it's the activities of us as a group, or potentially informing or connecting with whatever is coming out of these new grant opportunities. So our first webinar happened on January 28th. I think it was really great. We had 65 participants, plus the panelist and the host, which represented 23 programs, states. So it was hard to tell from registrations if people were working with Sea Grant programs or maybe were just connected to them in their state. So I don't want to say for sure that we had 23 Sea Grant programs represented, but still it was about 70% of the network, which I think was great. We had 4 presentations. Kimberly Prather was invited to kind of give a high-level overview. She has done a lot of research on aerosols and has a grant related to COVID-19, and was kind of looking at the atmospheric ocean kind of interface and when bacteria and other things become aerosols. And so that was very interesting. And then we highlighted a couple of Sea Grant funded projects, one in the Great Lakes, one in Pennsylvania. And then Chris Stepanek talked about kind of the needs that came up in a volunteer monitoring program, volunteer like water monitors during the pandemic. So that was kind of the overview of that. And then just as we open it up for discussion, we wanted to give folks who were on the webinar to share if they had a favorite thing or if anything that they would change. But while we're giving folks a chance to complete the poll, I also wanted to provide an opportunity for anyone to come off of mute and share if you were able to participate in the webinar, what you thought about it, things that we might take away, lessons learned for next time.
Stephanie, I'll start us off. I think one of the things that I enjoyed the most was the interaction between the participants and the panel and everyone, just chiming in and asking great questions.
Hey, Stephanie, Sam here. First, I think lots of organization and planning by the team, especially the facilitation that you and Karen did. It flowed really well. And along with that takeaway about the organization is that most of the participants felt this topic was still fairly new for them, even though COVID and environment and in the water and public health it's something that should be quite essential, but people didn't know much about it. And so this was informative. And I believe later on in one of your polls, you had a poll, whether or not you're going to use this information. I think that was an interesting one, and that I think about well over half the people said they would use it, so which was positive.
I love that so many people have favorite things. Yeah. We thought about breaking this question out into 2 slides, but we have such limited time on these calls that we thought we would just try it out together.
There was one thing that Kim Prather brought up, is that we know very little, if any, about whether or not COVID can be can infect marine, for example, and their transmissibility. So that's a big open area. And also, we continue to learn that not much testing is actually done on the near coast. It's more freshwater based, and when they do sample, they immediately decontaminate the water. So we don't really know whether or not there is actually live virus or not in that water. We just know that there's the RNA or DNA presence.
Yeah, there was so much to think about. Yeah. Oh, and yeah, great comment or feedback about the word clouds. I noticed that too, that they were cool, but they swapped fast and they went in like different directions. So it was a bit hard to read sometimes. Okay, well, great. Well, the other thing, going to the next question, we just wanted to, this was part of our evaluation survey. So some of you may have already answered this question if you took the survey after the webinar, but we wanted to include it here as part of the debrief today, just to kind of bring back up the issues of DEI and the importance to some of the connections that we made in the vision plan, or the work that the network is doing. And so if anyone has thoughts about this, to share through the poll or by coming off mute, we just wanted to spend just a little time to think about this. And Sam, I don't know, not to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you wanted to share. I thought you had a good observation about how the wastewater treatment research could actually highlight disparities in access to care or certain like pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I believe our third speaker, very eloquent speaker, I forgot her name. I should know, but she was looking at the different medications that are being used now to treat COVID. And so her data sparked my thinking in terms of DEI, and that maybe it's one way for us to take a look at really where our populations, our sensitive populations, our impacted populations are able to get those type of advanced medications, and where they're not. I thought that would be something worth looking into, and also it can actually help spark us in our coastal work and seeing, what are some of the communities that maybe could actually use more of the precaution and other aspects of assistance that we can offer at the community level.
Thanks. So looks like we stumped the group on this question, which is fine. It was just something to think about, keep in the back of your mind. Anybody have other thoughts or anything they'd want to share before we move on? Okay, all right. Okay. All right, so that was the COVID-19 webinar. I should mention that one thing that we do want to do with these webinars is to come out with some sort of product after the webinars. The planning committees help work on that, to think about. So we're kind of thinking about something related to COVID-19, maybe like a short 4-page document that can highlight some of these projects that Sea Grant is involved in and supporting, and provide a little bit of overview about some of the the gaps and things like Sam was talking about. And so please stay tuned for that. Lacey Allison at the National Sea Grant Office has helped us kind of try to mine peer a little bit to gather information about what projects might be out there. But if your program is working on a COVID-19 related kind of water resources project, please send me an email and let me know if you think it should be highlighted or included in what we're putting together. Our goal is to try to get that document out before the next webinar, so it kind of be part of the advertising for the next webinar. And the next webinar is emerging contaminants. So on our last all hands call, if you'll remember, we did some polling about what the group wanted to see in the webinar series. And we had two initially kind of bubble to the top. One was emerging contaminants, and the other was kind of like a stormwater related topic. And so I'm going to talk about how we've kicked off planning for those. But we have the potential to do 4 webinars in a year if there was the capacity in the network to do that. And we also hope to continue this next year. So we're always looking for ideas about potential topics. And so these are just the start, right? Not the final. So the target date for the emerging contaminants webinar is in late April. I've included the list of the planning committee members. Karen and I are also providing support to that group, along with Catherine Janessi and Olivia Deans from the National Sea Grant Law Center. And so it's been great working with them so far. We have developed a working agenda. One change we're planning on making since the first webinar is we had 4 speakers during the first webinar, and it was scheduled for an hour and a half. And although everybody stayed engaged throughout the webinar and we got really positive feedback, it felt a little long and a little hard to kind of get through that final presentation. So we're going to reduce it to 3 presentations and schedule it for an hour and 15 minutes, just to see if that works a little better. The 3 presentations will focus on a broad overview of emerging contaminants, kind of what is this category of things we're talking about, microplastics, and then PFAS. And these were picked in part because of the national attention in Congress and other places around microplastics and PFAS at the end of last year, and just general kind of focus of the network. We would also be looking for regional diversity among these presentations and our speakers as well. And we're considering kind of wrapping up the webinar with a panel discussion, so we can highlight some things just beyond the presentations. And we are also discussing and considering tie-ins with the forthcoming grant opportunities once we find out more details about those and which programs might be working on proposals and how the webinars might be able to fit into those discussions or the scoping exercises, or however that works. Anybody from the emerging contaminants group has anything to add? Did I miss anything?
Steph, I think you've hit the high points. But Mike, Mary, anybody have any? I think I saw Brooke on here as well. Anything that you want to add?
No, I think that was great.
Good. Okay. Thanks. So great. So yeah, so we're in good shape. Once we identify potential speakers, we'll work with them to get some better dates, and so stay tuned for more information about that.
Yeah, hey Stephanie, one of the things that I remember Darren Lerner mentioned is that given the number of contaminants that we all work on, that he suggested that we focus on the emerged contaminants, at least for this round. And so that's probably one of the reasons why we're focusing on the microplastics and the PFAS for now. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that the others are not important.
Right. This is such a huge category, like, to get your head around. And we also feel like this is definitely you could do a whole webinar on any of these and all the other ones that we work on. So I have a feeling we'll continue to come back to emerging contaminants throughout the webinar series as it continues. Great. Okay. So then the other one I mentioned that kind of bubbled to the top was, stormwater, potentially green infrastructure. After our all hands call, the Water Resources Vision Team leadership group got together and talked a bit about, whether it might be worth reaching out to the flooding vision team to see if they would want to partner and co-host a webinar with us. After that conversation, I did reach out to the folks in that vision team. They didn't really feel comfortable or felt like they had the capacity to kind of formally partner with us on that at the time, because we're looking at this July target date, like, kind of coming up, we would want to do that now. But out of that conversation, Kelly Samwick with the national office reached out about possibly building off of a panel session that she did for Ray, the Restore America's Estuaries conference last year, which we think does have a lot of good connections. And so I've invited Kelly to join us today to just give an overview of the panel that she did and kind of get any thoughts about this. And then if it sounds good, we're going to open a call for volunteers. So Kelly, do you just want to give a broad overview of your session?
Sure. Yeah. So I got involved because I had seen that request to the coastal flooding group. I'm nominally associated with that visioning team from the National Sea Grant Office. So when I saw other folks not able to lend some capacity to that, I raised my hand and said, well, hey, just finished, working on this panel for Ray, and so there might be an opportunity to potentially recycle some of that material, which obviously, some people saw through Ray, but didn't necessarily reach our network. So it's always great to give our folks the benefit of stuff we've worked on. And so I sent around the session proposal, and in particular, one of the panelists, Stephanie Hurley, who is a professor at University of Vermont and has been a Lake Champlain funded PI, and her particular presentation as part of that panel, because the panel was broader than just green stormwater infrastructure. It was also more generally natural nature-based infrastructure strategies. And really my goal with that was showcasing sort of the range of sea grant capacities in that space. So there was some geographic diversity considerations, types of presentation of work, and the functional areas, were all considerations in putting it together. So I don't think that it is necessarily a one-to-one conversion, because it is a little bit broader than just looking at stormwater green infrastructure. But I thought Stephanie Hurley's presentation in particular, she focused on bioretention, rain gardens, and but she is also could be very appropriate for giving a broader background of what green infrastructure is. There's also the possibility of cribbing from Nikki Pace's presentation that was part of that. She presented on her work doing a case study of the integration of green infrastructure, or the lack of integration of green infrastructure within the community rating system for the National Flood Insurance Program. So those were the two most direct presentations of that panel on green infrastructure. That we could invite those folks, if folks think that those are good presentations to incorporate in this type of webinar. It's easily done because we know they have the content already.
Great. Thanks so much, Kelly, for that overview. So we would Karen and I and the other folks at the National Sea Grant Law Center, we would take the same approach to this webinar that we've been doing to the other ones, which is we provide kind of that logistical support for the committee. We help schedule calls, we maintain the notes, we, kind of just help figure out how we want to approach this, what our speakers would be. So I think, for now, I'll kind of open it up and see if, if people think like they kind of like this idea, to put that in the chat, or if you have questions or thoughts, you can come off of mute. If this sounds really great to you and you'd like to be part of the planning, please also, volunteer by just putting your name in the chat box. So with that, I'll open it up. Oh, good, we got 2 volunteers already. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see Jen's note. You probably know Amanda Rockler was also on that panel, and there was certainly content from her presentation that I think is intriguing in this, which she spoke about the landscaper credential certification as sort of one way of incentivizing folks out in the world to engage in this type of work. So that might also be appropriate to steal from this previous panel.
Yeah. The other thing that I forgot, I skipped over the bullet. The other thing is it by July, it may be that the team or the programs have been selected for that green infrastructure competition, and there could be an opportunity to connect with that group and be a part of the scoping, maybe for that work as well. So yeah, this all sounds great. So thanks to all the volunteers. If anything comes to you after the call, feel free to email Karen or I at any time. And we look forward to working with everyone. Good. So I'm so excited about this webinar series. I know the group has talked about it for a while, and to see it get off the ground. As I mentioned, these were our target was to do 3 for this first year. If we could get 4 in, that would be amazing. July, August. So that would probably be like a September, October deadline, trying to get it in before the holiday. So if you have something that you think would be a great topic for a webinar and would like the group to consider it, please, send me an email. We can bring it to the leadership group. We can bring it up on the next all hands call. We really want to capture all of these ideas. Okay. So for the last 20 minutes or so, we just wanted to have a conversation about planning for the future. What do we want to highlight on the calls? What do we want to do on the calls? So just as a refresher, on our last all hands call, we had some polling questions about this, as I mentioned. Requested kind of meetup actions, or the options that rose to the top in the polling that we did on the last call were brainstorming, project planning, kind of regional breakouts, formal topical presentations, and then program updates. We had some winners, but there were a lot of ties. So it was a little hard to, figure out, other than like project brainstorming kind of being one of the top things. So for the rest of the call, we're going to have 2 different polling questions to try to start thinking about what the next call could look like. We want to dedicate some time on the next call to highlighting a project or a program from within our group. And then if we want to in the future have some project brainstorming, what might that look like? So I'm going to go to the next slide. This is a new type of polling question for me, so bear with us. If it works the way it's supposed to, if somebody has an idea for a project or activity that they would like to see highlighted, we should be able to then upvote certain ideas. So you could go back and vote on a colleague's idea that you liked. But as people are thinking and waiting to fill out the poll, please feel free to come off mute, ask questions. If this idea, if it's not clear, what we're trying to get at here, or if you have thoughts. I feel like before the next all hands call, we probably should tell everybody to get their coffee out because we're going to make them think. It's late in the day for some of us and early for the rest of us. Ooh, that's a good one. Always like, yeah, how do we work across programs? Um,
Hey, Stephanie, the idea of potential collaboration with the national office funding opportunity is interesting. Is the timing on that going to be, do you think that that might be appropriate, or do we know yet if that could end up being, the call could end up being too late for that topic?
So I'm worried that it'll go to like the competition is going to run too fast. Kelly or Allison, do you just have a general sense about when those proposals are going to be due if the call comes out, in the next week or two?
So we've got the issue that we have every year this time is that we've got that grants management deadline at the end of June, early July. So that's why, Stephanie, I said that we'd probably know the team by the July webinar. It'll be pretty quick, probably looking at a May deadline on anything coming out in the next week or so. First deadline for the applications, and then obviously the review and processing through early summer.
Okay, great. So yeah, so if we're thinking, that we only have quarterly all hands calls, that's probably not fast enough, but I'm certainly open to offering to facilitate calls among members of this group. If you do want to talk, we could maybe try to get something. So the Sea Grant Association meeting is coming up in 2 weeks. That's kind of a little busy time. But yeah, maybe, you can feel free to share in the chat if you'd be interested in something like that. I could send a doodle poll out to the group if there would be interest in having a call about those funding opportunities.
And Steph, Mary made a great comment in the chat that we might want to distribute information about that call if we have it to the wider audience as well, so that more people could join if they want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. Yeah, and Mary suggested an earlier all hands call. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could, because of this potential opportunity, we could just throw in an extra all hands call for that as well. So it seems like the chat that there is potentially some interest in those conversations. So we can follow up with that.
And the other thing I was thinking, seeing these great ideas on here, Steph, is that we might be able to actually address some of these on later calls as well.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be a lot of interest.
Yeah, because there's always the potential for, other not national office funding opportunities. And if we, just create an ongoing kind of mechanism for the group to collaborate, I think that would be great. Good. Okay. All right. Well, we'll give maybe just one more minute because I still things keep changing. This is kind of fun to watch, but we'll just in case anybody is in the middle of oops, made a loud, my screenshot made a loud noise. We work on that. So, okay, good. All right, well, so then we'll go to the next one. Okay. So then this is a more open-ended. We just wanted to give a chance for people that feel more comfortable sharing in writing. Because the project brainstorming kind of rose to the top, this could also be potentially brainstorming about grant proposals or projects you're trying to get funded. We wanted to just spend a little time thinking about what that might look like. If we dedicated 30 minutes of an all hands call to project brainstorming, what might that look like? So we're not looking for any definitive answers here, just some ideas as well. And also while we're thinking about this, one thing that we've been trying, I mentioned the one pager that we produced after the last all hands call. One of our hopes with that was just to kind of highlight who's all coming to the calls, what ideas people have. I believe I sent that to the water resources listserv, so you all should have gotten it. I don't know if you did, but if you did and you found it helpful, would love to hear about that. If you think that is something that we should, try to do after, future calls. That would be great. And again, feel free to come off mute to ask questions about this polling question or other things that we've been talking about.
I think we can say people are definitely awake now.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do the leadership team does have a Google folder and does some brainstorming with that. So that's certainly something on future calls we can help with. We could have, in addition to polling and things like that, we can do shared documents. So. I know sometimes the silence is uncomfortable, but we want to give people time to think, not just race through these questions.
Stephanie, slightly aside, but I'm going to go ahead and just let you know that Reed had a great question early on about whether you might know the speakers that were going to be speaking during the lightning rounds at the SGA meeting coming up in March.
Yeah. No, we haven't gotten that far yet. We did, so about 2 weeks ago, I guess, maybe, I sent a note to the group, this whole group, with suggestions for speakers for the Emerging Contaminants webinar series. We got a lot of great suggestions. That group hasn't met yet to think about that, but that is a potential source as well for these speakers for the lightning round. So if other things have come to mind, or if you didn't send suggestions in response to that email, feel free to send me an email, and it'll kind of go into the pot, because a lot of that's going to depend on who might be available on short notice at 5 o'clock Eastern time. So. Oh, someone's ambitious. A National Sea Grant water conference. That would be fun. Maybe an idea there is an open call in the national office for workshops. I think the one deadline is in early March, and then another one in May. So if we're also talking about potential collaboration over proposals, that's another one that's out there that might be interesting.
Might be a great opportunity for us to host a session at Sea Grant Week as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or think about other conferences, that might be, underway. Okay. Right. Well, maybe just another 30 seconds in case anyone's typing. I don't want to cut anybody off, but then we'll kind of move on.
I think the National Sea Grant Water Conference, working with our land grant partners, would be a viable project to pursue.
Yeah, and maybe, Sam, isn't there like a joint sea grant, land grant, aquaculture meeting? Maybe that's like a potential model for how that's worked.
Yeah, that is something that Ladon is thinking through.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in terms of the water project, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, the last one was actually 2014 between land grant and sea grant, or maybe even earlier.
Yeah, I don't know.
It was longer ago than that, I think. I mean, I used to coordinate water programs on the land grant side, and those were good meetings, but I don't think we've had one in a couple decades, or at least 10 years.
No, that's a great idea.
Portland may be the last one. That's what Jennifer said.
Yeah. There's definitely lots to talk to after that. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for all of these ideas. We'll definitely, take it in and, think about it and come back with some thoughts too. So that was kind of the end of our, planned agenda of things that we wanted to update everybody about. This is just a reminder of, that we do have our vision plan. The national office seems to have, been taking it into consideration as they've been thinking about these funding opportunities. There may be more coming with congressional interest in some of the contaminants that Sea Grant has been working on. And so I think this is a great opportunity to really highlight the expertise that's already in our network, all of the great work and projects that are already going on, and how the additional funding can really take it to the next level and to have a lot more coordination among the teams.
Hey, Stephanie and team, I'm thinking if there's a way that we can learn about from our fisheries folks. For example, when it comes to like red snapper on the Gulf Coast, there's a lot of congressional mandates that come down, you to the National Sea Grant Office. You shall do this. what do we get to the point where we end up with a lot of congressional mandates around these different contaminants? You shall do this, and next thing we know, we've got a suite of 6 that we have to actually be running RFPs on or redirecting funds to. How do we be more proactive in that so that we can avoid the piecemeal approach?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, Sam, that's great to think about. Yeah, because I mean, just like the capacity of everybody to respond to all of the opportunities that come out, and the pots are small too, if you think about it. So, at least right now. Yeah, and Breck mentioned co-meet with USGS water resource centers. Also mentioned the UCOWR conference. I don't know how you pronounce it. Catherine Janessi from our office has presented a couple times at that conference. It's a really good conference. So like Karen said, there are probably opportunities for us to have sessions at some of these other meetings, or maybe have a whole separate track maybe to highlight some things. So great ideas for collaboration.
Yeah, so to Karen's question in the chat, I was thinking of it as a separate meeting to meet together, not as a part of Sea Grant. Frankly, I have an ulterior motive that I would really like the water centers to learn from Sea Grant. I think they have a lot to learn from Sea Grant. And as you know, there's a group of us who have been led by Darren Lerner, who have been trying to connect the water centers to Sea Grant in a more effective way.
Great, thanks. Okay, good. Well, we're getting close to the end of the hour. So does anybody else have anything else they want to share or say or just bring up for the good of the order? Are these calls helpful? You don't have to come off of mute, but so this is the second one that we've had. So we hope that we're providing information that you find useful. We want to try to provide opportunities to connect. So I think the feedback about a desire to talk about these grant opportunities is great. And for us to think about how we can facilitate that would be good.
Yeah, it's definitely, I'd just like to say that there was a lot of effort that went into these visioning statements initially, and we don't know when the next opportunities are going to come available. And so here, I mean, you mentioned a couple that we just learned about. So the hazardous materials and the green infrastructure. And so I think this is really valuable, and appreciate the effort that you and others are putting into keeping this percolating so that we can respond as opportunities come up.
Thanks. Yeah. Good. Okay, well, definitely stay tuned for those funding announcements from the national office. Once they come out, I will follow up with an email to our all hands list to see about getting a call scheduled for anyone that might be interested in talking about those opportunities. And then we can see, where the group might want to go from there. And as I get more information and it gets finalized for the SGA session, I will also send that information to the group. Stay tuned for more information about the Emerging Contaminants webinar. And then Karen and I will follow up with the folks who volunteered for the Green Infrastructure webinar and try to get our first planning call on the calendar for that. Lots going on, which is great.
Really appreciate the effort and the polls that engage us, Stephanie. Thanks for that. I know it takes time.
Yeah, learning something new every day, but yeah, it's good. Okay. Good. Well, thanks everyone. I will work on getting the recording up, so I'll also send an email about that to the listserv. Just, I know folks, not everybody could make it today, but yeah. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out at any time, and I really appreciate you attending today and participating in the polling and being part of the network. So thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Appreciate it. Thank